I got to think, why is armor important when it comes to the game? And it's not just that I like Anvil's design language a bit. I like it a little bit more than RSI and such. But Anvil's ships were always a little bit smaller. They were always these like heavily armored, more compact ships. And originally, when the game was coming out, they were supposed to be different sizes of jump portals, basically. So capital ships would only be able to go through the biggest ones, and smaller ships would be able to go through some of the smaller ones. And so I figured the biggest orgs would probably have these massive capital fleets, and so I drifted more towards anvil ships as a large-isk, medium to large size fleet that could go through the smaller jump portals, and that's changed. But it also comes down to some of these debates that I have with um, people with like the Myst Odyssey versus the Carrick and things like that. It isn't that I think that those ships are bad or that they will be bad, but it's that I think that military ships, we have basically two primary manufacturers. You have the um well, you got Aegis, RSI, and you got Anvil. And Aegis makes these kind of high-tech, high-powered um, first strike sort of aircraft basically, and they have like crazy unique designs for, sophisticated military spec aircraft is basically what I see. RSI basically is like a generalist manufacturer that manufactures a few different types of ships, but when it comes to their military contracts, it's more very big, very large, high-powered military craft, capital size. And then Anvil has always been more of like a modern military. Like if you think RSI is like battleships, like World War II battleships, then Anvil's like the modern, military, more sleek, more efficient, um, you know, good armor, like solid all around armor with decent firepower, more of kind of the mid range, not necessarily, meant to be in the attacking on the front lines, but they have more utility, mobility, all that good stuff. And then when you start thinking about what is in the game, there's really only a few things, honestly, here. When we look at the races so far, for the most part, you do have Vandal with missiles and things like that, and and the Banu, I'm still they have missiles and stuff as well. But a lot of the alien races have laser weaponry and like technology. So in atmosphere, they will have probably better flight capabilities and stuff, less parts that can be blown off. But they also use laser weapons, which, from what I understand through the lore, unless it's changed over the years, not that many years ago, they did have a discussion when they were talking about the Vulcan and the Crucible. Um, and they mentioned the lore when it came to shield technology and how it doesn't really stop ballistic projectiles. It reduces the velocity before they hit. And with alien laser weapons and stuff, they don't have any mass. So apparently, what's supposed to happen is that the shield tech, when when physical objects come into the shield, it slows down the object to help blunt the force. And then when it comes to laser weapons, they hit the shield and it dissipates because it doesn't have any physical matter, so it can't go through. And this makes it to where ships with bigger penetrating ammunition are able to go through shields and make big dents in ships that don't have enough armor. And when it comes to, like, let's say the RSI Perseus, size 7 bespoke cannon shooting physical projectile, like big physical shells, that means that, even if, let's say there's because they talk about being able to modify your ammunition in the Perseus. So let's say that theoretically there's an explosive round. Chris Roberts and them, let's say they watched that Battlefield movie and they had the battleship fight the aliens and it had the explosive rounds that they had to move from one turret to the other when the one got destroyed. Well, if a explosive round goes through a shield and then it still hits, it doesn't really matter that it doesn't have the velocity as much because the explosion's still going to go off, you know? And, but when it comes to laser weapons, you have to get through the shields. So, with a lot of combat, people that have uh, physical rounds are basically human. So in our first few systems, we're very common, like we're able to see this quite a lot. But realistically, it's going to be players without like a lot of orgs that don't want to deal with ammunition and producing ballistic rounds and stuff like that. They're probably just going to run lasers. And you can see this now in PvP because most of the PvP players are just running lasers because they say they're better. But with engineering and stuff coming down the line, ballistics will have a point, I mean, a purpose. And since ballistics take more logistics and supply and all of that, you can expect them to become pretty good in the future, I would assume. Now, I'm not saying this is a one-stop shop for all alien, ships and things like that, because alien ships, as we've seen, actually even get bigger than the human ships. But when you go into combat, I expect most of the alien ships to have a lot of energy-based weapons, and they probably have quite a few missiles. So we're looking at that. We know that we need shields to stop energy-based weapons, and then you start looking at like things like the MISC manufacturers, which with MISC they could potentially have armor composites and stuff like that. And I'm not, throwing armor composites out the window. I think armor composites are going to be a very important thing later on in the game, and you can probably, I would assume, potentially replace any of the armor on the outside of a ship with a composite at some point to make it more durable, which would make every ship in the game a lot better end game than it would be starting out. Okay, so if they balanced all the ships to be equal end game, and then they're not equal at the beginning, then you have like the different varieties and all that stuff that you can have different purchases, different entry levels, but the same endpoint. I do like that idea a little bit, but I don't automatically like when I look at like a MISC company, I don't think armor. I think potentially a composite, but it's more like a civilian RV. They have a lot of luxury, they have a lot of utility, they have pretty much all of the facilities and things that you would possibly ever want inside of a ship. Take the Odyssey, for example. You probably have like aquaponic systems in there, food, oxygen, water recycling. You got mining, you got refining, you got mobility. You got a big cargo bay area, all of that. But then when you look at like the design of the ship, there's multiple entry points, there's big open areas. Um, any of those systems could potentially get damaged, which makes them not as good. And then when you look at something like the Carrack, you got potentially, lower shields, but you also got higher armor. So while it might not be as effective at stopping laser weapons from getting through and damaging the ship, it will have armor to help protect versus the laser weapons when they get through the shields, and also be able to protect against ballistics being shot by pirates and humans and players and things along those lines. Environmental conditions, which is partially why I like a good amount of armor on my ships. And I think as ballistics become more important later on, if they do stay relevant in the game, uh, having good armor will be a good thing to have because you can just take, say, the Odyssey, for example, and in my mind, you don't want to, like, everyone that talks to me about the Odyssey, and I talk about like putting it in a military fleet, they always ask like, why wouldn't I put an Odyssey there instead of a Carrack or something? And specifically, it's one because of the design of the ship. I think that the engines are vulnerable and all that stuff, and two, the I don't think that it's going to have the armor needed to stop ballistic rounds. So even like against like NPCs and aliens and all that stuff, using laser weapons, or even against other players that don't have huge supply lines to supply you, and they just fight you with laser weapons, and yeah, the Odyssey is going to be great at that because it has very powerful shields. But as soon as you go up against, say, like a pirate or a player or an NPC that's running major ballistics, I think it's going to go right through the shield and it's going to blow off your engine or damage a component and you're going to be stuck in the water. So instead of having really strong shields or super strong armor, I like that middle ground, and I also like the size. I like the flexibility when it comes to like ship sizes as well. So with the javelin and things like that, you can't like land on a planet surface. Not the biggest thing, but if you can't land on a planet surface, then you're always going to have to defend yourself against other ships that can't land on planet surfaces. So And if you're able to land on a planet surface, you don't have to worry about, a javelin flying over, nuking your ship out of orbit, and then, dealing with all that. Potentially, you'd have to worry about them coming down, but it seems like less risk, there's more area for them to need to search. And then if someone does come down, they're not going to be able to bring every big ship that they possibly can, and at least it takes those ships kind of out of their element. Javelin might be able to come down out of atmosphere, but when you're looking at a javelin, um, let's just take the Squadron 42 video or the gameplay that they showed during CitizenCon. You have like the Bengal carrier, and they're fighting, boom, 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 and then the fighters come in and they destroy the turrets on the bottom, and then he's like, "We need covering fire." That's what I'm picturing when you're talking about planetary atmospheric flight. Even if you had a Bengal carrier and it was able to go into atmosphere, you would fly it down. You were only going to be able to get access to those bottom turrets. So, say you have two turrets or however many are down there. Well, all I have to do is destroy those turrets or cripple your engines and have you crash. Since our ships are already on the ground, we don't really have to worry about crashing, and a lot of ships have more upper direction firepower than lower direction firepower. So you'll look at a lot of ships, say like the free, or was it the Freelancer, things like that. Two upper turrets, one lower turret. Odyssey, two upper turrets, one lower turret. There's a lot of, it seems like, balance for aerial defense more than ground assault with a lot of ships. And this is where, for me, the balance becomes, um, do I really care about getting into fleet battles with people in space? Not necessarily. Um, as long as I can make it to a planet and land, I'll be okay for the most part. Now, the thing that this becomes a lot more important with would be like moons and things that have no gravity or atmosphere. Those big ships are going to be able to go and nuke you and take you out. But as long as there's planets with, gravity or some sort of, you know, something that keeps ships from going in there, I would be fine landing my ships in it and staying in there for a while and using it as cover. Probably the worst effect you could have is like, it being corrosive or something and your ships, break down and collapse on the planet. But for me, that is the gameplay when it comes to a game like this. It's not necessarily win or losing a PvP fight with people in space. It's if I go down and I crash on a planet, I like the survival aspect. I want to be able to go crash land and then pick up the pieces, start building a base or something down on the surface, and get everything up and running again, and then keep on trucking. And as long as we can defend ourselves and do that, I think it's important. And also on the topic with composites from before, I got this like a feeling that you have a ship with thin armor, right? Because they make this big deal with composites all the time. Like you have the Banu Defender has a unique armor composite that keeps it lightweight and, durable or whatever. There's a few ships like that. Then you have like sabers and stuff that have probably an armor composite that makes them more stealthy. So we're looking at armor composites and stuff in the future that could potentially have all these kind of effects. So you could take the Saber's armor composite and stick it on a Carrack, or take that armor composite and stick it on a Kraken. There might be any number of like composites that you can put on things, or but when we really look at some of these ships, so like the Drake ships, for instance, are built out of recycled material. So starting off, they could be like the lowest of the low with armor durability or whatever, but very, very easy to just repair with just any random material. And then when we look at anvil ships, for instance, I'm looking at, well, they have thicker armor. So let's say that me and someone else only have access to the basic, like most basic material that we can find on a planet to repair our stuff with. You repair yours, and then I repair mine, and I have twice as much armor on my ship than you do. Even though we have the same composite, I will have more protection. So me giving up my shields for that, I think is going to be fine, because you're going to have to get through my shields, then get through my armor, and then take me down. Where all I have to do is get through your shields, and then, cripple you, or I could just run ballistics, go straight through your shields, cripple your ship. And that's my basic idea when it comes to armor versus shielding and stuff in the game. I think very powerful shields are going to be very good for PvE players going up against PvE aliens and things like that for the most part. Maybe not pirates. And I think armor is going to be a lot better when it comes to dealing with bigger battles, missiles, and basically PvP players, which, as you've seen in my videos over the last few weeks, just me playing around with my Carrack, ever since they added engineering or whatever to the game, I've been flying that Carrack for the last 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month or so, and I haven't destroyed it yet. I've still been flying it every day, and it hasn't went down yet, but every time that I've left or came back from a station, there's been players camping because that's what they're doing now. So they had a buff into stealth capabilities of a lot of ships, and so these PvP players figured out, well, oh, stealth is super broken. It's really funny if we just set out here and kill people where they can't see us. And so that's what I've been dealing with every day, going out and from a bunch of firebirds and stuff. They chase you down, they shoot missiles at you. The the Carrack's been getting red from it. As soon as they hit me once, it gets red. But even when I come in, usually I'm red and they hit me once or twice and it's still red. So I don't know what the limits are and when that's going to break. But so far, none of my fuses have been blown up. My ship hasn't got damaged. I've been able to repair in the stations and leave and exit fine. And that is also very important when it comes to quantum travel, because, for instance, when I'm leaving Grimhex, like we did the other day, I decided to leave my shields down to have my quantum ready and try to jump out as quickly as I could. And I ended up getting my quantum on and jumping, but they got a missile lock and fired a volley of missiles at the very end and smacked me in the tail with 2 or 3 missiles before my quantum fully took effect. And then they chased me down to the next point, and I was already trying to quantum to the next thing, and my quantum messed up. So then I had to reset, and they were there, and they fired another volley of 2 or 3 missiles right when I was leaving. So you can see that, in another ship, like an Odyssey, for example, you have more powerful shields. But when you're leaving places like that, if someone catches you and you take a shot, it's very possible that you're going to get a damaged engine or a damaged component or a hull breach somewhere, if your armor isn't good enough. And I don't know exactly what they plan on doing with all the armors and all the professions and ships, but for now, all I know is that Anvil has armor. Every ship it has armor for the most part. The only ship that I don't particularly, use or care that much for, because I think stealth is going to be very important, has been the Hornet. But even the Hornet is starting to grow on me a little bit, because I keep thinking of, the situations that I'd be using these ships, and the Hornet seems like I've liked the Saber forever. I like the looks of the Saber. I think stealth is going to be very important in the game, and the Saber can use size 4 missiles and stuff, which is going to make it very good for like picking off tanks and other things like that. Um, but the Anvil Hornet has fuel scoops. So when you're on a planetary surface, you're going to be able to keep it fueled a lot longer. You're not going to need to waste as much fuel when it comes to fueling all your ships. And that means that you can focus on like quantum fuel production or something when it comes to like a starfare or anything like that, or stay on a planet surface for longer and just use your quantum, boost whenever you need to get out really quickly, which would conserve quantum fuel for a longer period of time. But also like the extra armor, if you're using it for defense or you're using it for attacks or anything like that, being able to survive a couple of shots and get repaired is going to be a big deal. And I could easily see like someone flying a saber, for instance. Same thing with um the Vanguard. The saber and the Vanguard both have those foldy out wings. If one of those wings gets shot off, that ship's going to crash when atmospheric flight's coming in, compared to like an Anvil Hornet has 2 wings basically on the side, and they're a little bit thicker, a little bit more armored. So if that wing does shear off, you potentially have a secondary wing that could help you kind of glide back down and land. And so now I'm looking at the Hornet more as a defensive ship when it comes to my fleet because I don't plan on really using the Hornets that much. But when we look at like Squadron 42 and all that, and they've said that we've been able to earn a lightning, then potentially I could just have a couple of people with lightnings after Squadron 42 is done, put them on the ship, and then just keep those. And I think they have fuel intakes as well. They have more guns. I believe they have a couple of wings. I'd have to double check. But if it's armored at all, it could be a very important ship. And I mostly just want a couple of bigger ships for strategic drown attacks on my fleet. So most of my stuff in my fleet, I don't really care about large numbers. Pretty much basically about specific tools that you can call in for specific threats on the ground, and I don't have time or like enough space for a lot of fluff. If we were doing a full attack fleet, then yeah, I could just go and cram as many fighter jets and stuff as I want on top of a Kraken and be perfectly happy and be able to attack somebody with like 50 fighters. But I don't really care about 50 fighters, and I don't really care about massive engines. I don't really care about massive shields. I don't really even care that much about massive guns, but I do care about having specific tools to take out specific threats and being able to compile that into as small of a package as I possibly can with like enough utility. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit. Um, I think armor is very valuable, so can't really compete with it. And also anvil ships, a lot of them are designed to like crash land. I don't really know exactly if it's was planned that way or not, but like there's lore, a lot of lore about anvil ships taking critical damage, crash landing, and their crew being fine. And when I think about that, and I think about reputation and people wanting to conserve their life for their reputation in the future, to me that's pretty important. I like the thought of keeping the reputation in our party safe, making people who care about their life feel a little bit better, but also just surviving in general if you do happen to crash land. Like if a Cutlass gets shot down and you crash from like 1,000 feet in the air and you probably blow up, then that sucks. But a Valkyrie get shot down, crash, usually you survive. Terrapin, usually you survive. Legionnaire, I would assume, usually you're probably going to survive. There's a lot of ships that I think structurally are made to crash land on a planet and absorb a lot of damage. And the same thing goes with like ground vehicles. The Anvil ground vehicles are bigger, heavier, more armored, probably going to absorb more damage than, a rover or something like that. So right now our fleet uses a lot of rovers, um, pretty much for everything. But in the future, I could easily see replacing those with anvil vehicles because, why would you not have bigger shields or bigger armor on your ground vehicles? And especially when ballistics I feel like ballistics days they're coming pretty soon. So it'd be something to look out for. Even if like ballistics aren't necessarily good versus the same threat level, the fact that they'd be good versus like things lower than it would also like just be very good. Like even I've been thinking like this for a while, like the Carrack or whatever was probably going to be like the only ships in my fleet that I would really care to have laser-based weapons on that much because they're exploration ships and they might be out by themselves for a while. But if you put ballistics on them, like how fast could you shred a target? So like right now, a lot of like Corsairs and things like that, a lot of them are running like laser cannons, um, which is good. But if you were able to wrap around on a target, you know, and deal damage to them. Like, could they afford to run laser cannons if you could cripple them at any point? And since the Buccaneer or the Corsair doesn't have as heavy a armor as some of the other ships, you might be able to trade shots with them when it comes to laser-based weapons and stuff. And if that becomes the case, it might force them to have to start running ballistics as well to try and deal with you before you could actually get around to them. And then you'd have you know, size 5 ballistics versus size 4 ballistics. And I still think that heavily armored ships would be able to do a little bit more, take a little bit more out. So, y'all guys have a good one. And